Hi everyone, it's Rachel with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you my summer TBR. These are books that I'm going to be reading over the months of June, July, and August. And like a lot of readers, my mood really shifts with the seasons. So in the summer it gets really hot here, or at least hot for Canada, hence my lovely hat for this video. And so I want to look for books that are going to fit my mood because I tend to get kind of slumpy, and I like to pick up what I call lighter books over the summer months. See what I mean? And these are books that are all for the most part backlist titles, so books published before this year. So they're not review copies, but books I'm picking up on my own, and I thought you'd all like to know what I'm reading, and possibly you can plan your own reading if you want to join me for some of these. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk about the books related to my Patreon account. As always, if you want to financially support the channel, I do have a link down below. Basically, every month we vote on a theme and then books relate to that theme, and then we select a book to read and review together. I do little video responses and we just talk about it online, as well as using the space to talk about our lives and what we're up to and the holidays and all that. And so the book that we're going to be reading together in June is Our Soul to Keep by Tiana Reeve-Dew, which I believe is a fantasy romance horror book that I think involves vampire-like creatures that are called immortals. I don't know a lot more about it, but I really enjoyed Tiana Reeve-Dew's previous book about The Good House, and that was a book we also read for the book club, so I'm hoping I will enjoy this one as well. Even though vampires and romancy books aren't normally my thing, I have hope for it because of the author. We shall see how it all works out. Then for the month of July, because it's my birthday month, I do a special takeover where I get to select the short list that is voted on for the month. And so I selected a whole bunch of my favorite horror books that I wanted to reread this summer. And so the group voted on and picked out The Devil in Silver by Victor LaValle. This is one I read a couple years back, and I'd really like to revisit it now that Victor LaValle has become one of my favorite authors. This is a story of a man who, through reasons, ends up getting put into a mental institution. And it's a story that, of course, it is a horror story, so there are potential supernatural things going on, but really it's more about the horrors of what we do to those that have mental illness and what we do to the poor and those that are marginalized in society. And I remember reading it the first time and I was not prepared for the grim and depressing story it was. Now that I know what I'm getting, I definitely want to reread it, and I suspect I'm going to love it even more the second time around. So hopefully my book club will enjoy it as much as I do. I'm really looking forward to this reread. And for August, we're going to be reading a science fiction book, but at the time recording this, we haven't picked one yet, so I don't know what that's going to be. And then on top of that, I added a new perk to my top tier patron level, where each top tier patron can nominate a book, and then I do a random draw so that it's all equal and fair, and then one of their books gets selected to be added to my seasonal TBR. And the book that got selected is The White Oleander by Janet Fitch, which I know very little about. I know it is this dark literary book, but besides that, I'm not quite sure of the plot because on Goodreads, I looked at the synopsis and it's incredibly vague, which seems to be the case with a lot of literary books. But I have two friends in my patron group who both love this book, and so I have high hopes that I'm going to love it too, especially because of the fact that my tastes are starting to grow and expand, and I'm finding myself really loving more literary books with beautiful prose and themes and things that aren't necessarily horror books strictly, but just really dark and beautiful. I tend to really love those things, so I have high hopes that they've selected a really good one, and of course I will come back with a review once I finish it. Next, let's talk about other horror books besides my patron picks. The first one I want to talk about is Summer Suns by Lee Mandello, and this is a horror novel that follows a man who is trying to find out what happened to their queer lover. They passed away, possibly it was suicide, possibly not, so they're going to the college where they went off to see what happened. I understand that this book involves, of course, college life, but also has a car element to it. It's kind of pitched as being Fast and the Furious, whatever that's going to look like in this book form. And I do tend to love queer horror. I love that representation, and I'm just really curious for this one. I'll admit the reason it's in this TBR is because it's called Summer Suns, so I figured it was a good time of year to read it. But given the fact that I loved their new release, Feed Them Silence, I'm hoping that I'll love their backlist just as much, if not more. And next, I want to read Jaws by Peter Blanchie, and this of course is the horror classic about the shark, and that is basically all I know. I've never seen the movie or any other adaptation if there are others out there, but I want to read this book. I figure summer is the perfect time to do it. I don't really get to the beach a lot, but if I do manage to get there this summer, I'm definitely going to take this book with me. It just sounds really fun. I expect it to be a little bit campy, a little bit dated, but I have to check it out. At this point, I really need to read all the horror classics, and I do love a good creature feature, so I'm hoping I love this one, especially because I can't swim. I think it's going to be extra terrifying because I'm already scared of the ocean, even without the shark factor factored in. And to round it out and make a shark week of it, I decided I'm also going to read Meg by Steve Alton, which I think is another shark book. I know, again, nothing about it. It's supposed to be another creature feature, and that's about it. I really don't know what one book is about versus the other, so I figure I'm going to read them back to back and give you a double review and call it Shark Week. I've already figured out the video title, but I just need to read the book. So I think that'll be, again, a perfect book to read in the summer. Hopefully I enjoy it. Who knows, but you'll find out either way. And then we have Warm Bodies by Isaac Myron, and this is a young adult zombie story that I think got pretty popular when the movie came out. I never saw the movie, story of my life, but I am curious to read this one, even though I don't read a lot of YA fiction. I understand it's about two zombies that fall in love, and yes, falling in love, romance, especially young adult romance, is not normally my thing, but I really love zombie fiction, and especially in the summer, my taste when it comes to fiction leans towards the easy, fun reads versus the really serious ones. This is not a season where I crave really dark, gothic stories. Instead, I'm looking for a bit of escapism, I'm looking for something funny or entertaining, and I'm hoping that this one is going to fit the bill because I know I'm going to hit a reading slump during the summer months, and I'm going to save this book for that mood when I just don't feel like reading, because I feel like it's going to be a little bit different and hopefully kick me right back out of that slump, because I know what's coming. It happens every single summer. And I also want to read some thrillers and mysteries, so I have lined up a couple, the first one being Never Let You Go by Chevy Stevens, and this is a thriller that follows a woman who had an abusive partner. She got away from them, I think they went to jail, and now possibly they're out and coming for them. I'm always fascinated by abusive partner thrillers and stories. I just find them to be a really interesting and important topic to discuss, but of course, content warnings for anyone who does not want to read that. I totally respect that, but I do find it an interesting topic, and I'm hoping it's well done. But I do have to admit that I've read Chevy Stevens before and didn't necessarily like their work. They're a Canadian thriller author, so I really want to love them. But years ago, before I had a booktube channel, I read Still Missing, and I remember hating it. So I have avoided them ever since, but I feel like it's time to give them another try. Maybe Still Missing was just a one-off bad time for me, and so hopefully this one will work out a lot better. Then for more of a mystery, I also want to read Coptown by Karen Slaughter. I've read more of her popular newer books like False Witness and Pretty Girls, and so I would like to go back to her older stuff. I've generally heard that her older stuff is not as good as some of her new releases. This one I think is more of a thriller mystery where you follow a female cop in a racist, sexist town, and they of course are trying to solve a mystery. I'm expecting this one honestly to be a little bit predictable and simple, but I do really like Karen Slaughter's storytelling, so I'm hoping that will pull me through. And as always, you'll know when I know. And finally for mysteries, I want to read A Time to Kill by John Grisham. I have never read this author before. I only know the vague synopsis. I think this is his most popular or well-known book. In this one, I think we follow a small town where there is a brutal murder that appears to be racially charged, and then it is investigated. I want to check it out because, again, he is a big name in the mystery thriller genres, especially when it comes to legal fiction, and I've just never tried his work. I like the idea of legal fiction, but I've only read a few in the subgenre. I've liked those, but I definitely need to read more. So if you are a John Grisham fan, please let me know, is this where I should start, or do you have a different recommendation for something else you think I'll like more? Next, I want to read a couple of coming of age stories this summer, which once again, if I'm going to read coming of age stories, I want to read them in the hot summer months because typically they tend to be set in the summer. The first one I want to check out is The Hush by John Hart, which is a coming of age story I know very little about except for the fact that it's the companion sequel to The Last Child, also by John Hart, that I read and loved last year, which was about a boy who was looking for his missing family member, and of course things ensued. So I have no idea where this one's going to go. I think it follows the same character, but obviously a different mystery. I actually don't know if this one's going to be as much of a coming of age or more of a straight up mystery, but I want to check it out because I was really impressed by that one. It's an author I'd never heard about. I don't really see them talked about on booktube, and I need to know if they're going to be a favorite author, which means I need to keep reading their work. And I also want to read The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugendes, which is a coming of age story that follows a group of boys who collectively tell this narrative of a group of sisters who one by one begin to commit suicide. And this is a book that I actually read last year, but if you never heard me talk about it on my channel, it's because I never filmed a review. And that was because because I read this book, I loved it, and then I had this crisis moment where I felt like the book wasn't enough of a thriller, it wasn't horror, and I felt like I couldn't talk about it on my channel because it didn't fit my niche of my genres. And so because of that, I felt very frustrated, and that was one of the books that really led me to change how I count books towards my channel, how I allow myself to talk about things that are dark fiction, even if they're not really horror, as I've discussed in a recent video. So because I never talked about it, I really want to review it on my channel, but honestly, I do want to reread it first so that I can give you my fresh thoughts. It is a very literary, slow-burning book, and it's one that has really left me thinking about it, but I would love to revisit it so I can give you a better comprehensive review of it. So stay tuned for that. I can't wait to talk about it on my channel. I'm dying to get back to this one. And finally, for coming of age stories, I want to read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith, and this is a classic coming of age female narrative set in, I believe, New York, or obviously Brooklyn. And I don't know much more about it, but I really think I'm gonna love it for some reason. I don't read a lot of classics, I don't love a lot of classics, but this one has always stuck in my head as one that I really think I'm gonna like. And again, because it is more set in this summer or coming of age narrative, I think it's the right time of year to try it out. And I hope I like it. Hopefully it's dark enough or coming of age enough to count, because I really want to review it on my channel if I do like it. So let me know if you're okay with me, again, cheating more on my genres and kind of just talking about the books that I really enjoy, because if I love this one, I'm going to want to gush about it. I have a good feeling and I hope I'm not wrong. Next, let's talk about science fiction. And in the summer months, I do lean more towards sci-fi thrillers or just books that I consider to be a little bit lighter in tone. So it's not the time of year where I'm reading really dense, hard science fiction. And if I am going to read space opera, it tends to be the more fun ones than something that's really epic in scale. Those I much prefer to read in the cold winter months. So here's what I have for my tentative backlist TBR. The first one is a book that I received as a gift, and that is The Light Brigade by Cameron Hurley. This is a military science fiction book that I've heard amazing things about. I don't want to give away too much of the plot. I kind of know what it is about, but I don't know if that's a spoiler. This is a book that was again gifted to me this spring, and as part of my plan to keep my TBR as close to zero as possible, I definitely am going to be reading this book over the summer so that I can continue to read the books that I receive and buy in a reasonable amount of time. I'm dying to read this one. I, of course, love this author's fantasy last year, The Mirror Empire, and so I'm hoping to love their science fiction just as much. And also, in an effort to keep my TBR down, I'm going to be reading Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert, which, if I posted the video correctly, you should have already seen my book haul where I mentioned buying this via Book Outlet. And so yes, I want to be reading what I buy, and so at least I'm going to read this one. I'm probably going to reread Dune first. I don't know if I'm going to read any more books after this one, but at least this one is going to make my summer TBR. You might see the next book on my fall TBR depending on how things go. Next for sci-fi, we have Lexicon by Max Barry, which is a sci-fi thriller that follows a man who at the beginning of the story I think is like kidnapped or something. It's one of these things where I don't really know the synopsis of a book until I read it, as you've probably figured out by this video. But essentially it is in this world where people have learned how to use language as weapons. It sounds just incredibly cool and geeky, which is exactly what I want from a summer sci-fi thriller. I've had this book on my radar for years and years now, and I'm so excited to finally read this one. I really think I'm going to love it, and yeah, I don't know, I just have a good feeling about this one. And I also want to try Born by Jeff Vandermeer, which is a piece of weird science fiction that I think involves a scientist who finds a cute little weird thing, and there's also a flying bear. That's pretty much all I know, and that synopsis might also be totally wrong. I've read this author before, but admittedly, I'm pretty hit or miss. I read Annihilation and found it to be just okay. I've tried other books by them before and have put them down, but for whatever reason, I think that this one is my best chance of liking it. Despite that weird synopsis, which again could be wrong, I believe this one is the most traditional of his novels and tends to have a bit more wide appeal, so I'm hopeful it's going to be weird in a good way. I always think that I like weird horror and weird science fiction, and then I go to read them and they just don't work for me. So let me know if you're the same way with weird fiction and what you think of Jeff Vandermeer's work. I feel like he's very hit or miss with different readers, and obviously I'm hoping this one will be a hit because I keep trying his work thinking I'm going to love it, so one of these times that's got to be right? That's got to work out, hey? And I also want to read Nexus by Ramaz Nam, and this is a sci-fi thriller I know very little about except for the fact that it deals with the drug industry, which can be a really topical place to go when it comes to science fiction because a lot of terrible things can happen there, but also a lot of great things. And so I'm curious to check this one out. I've seen it forever online. It's a book that the audio is on Scribd, and so I've almost picked it up many times because I love the narrator, Luke Daniels, and then another book grabs my attention and I don't read it. So I'm committing to it. I'm going to check it out this season. If I like it, I'll let you know. If I don't like it and I still manage to finish it, I'll also let you know. Next up is Infomocracy by Maka Alder, and this is the first book in a trilogy. So if I like it, I plan to read all the books. But this is set in a near future where there has been a change in how political systems are run. So there is a different form of democracy. So micro-democracy, I believe, is in place, where people vote for the government just over their small area versus over a nation. I think I'm explaining that right. I will hopefully come back with a better synopsis once I've read this book. And again, there's 2 more books, so if I like this, there's more to come. I know Angela from Science Lines read these, and I just thought it really fun. Again, these are books that have been on my radar forever. I started the first book and then I got distracted by something else, and so I want to come back to it. I really think I'm going to like it. I read this author's new novella that came out this year that was about a mystery set on Jupiter, and I liked it, so I think I'm really gonna like a full-length novel by them. It just sounds really unique. Political sci-fi thrillers is something I feel like we need more of. Actually, there probably are a lot of them. I just need to find them and read them. So if you have recommendations, let me know down below. And finally, for sci-fi, I want to read Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I think a lot of you are going to be excited to see this on my list because I know it is a fan favorite, especially here on BookTube. And the reason I've never read it is because I know it involves a class system where different people wear different colors. And I remember hearing the synopsis and thinking that sounded a lot like The Hunger Games, which made me super nervous to pick it up because it sounded like young adult books, even though it was classified as adult. I have heard that the first book is not the strongest, so if you agree with that, let me know so that I feel some pressure or expectation to kind of push on through to the later books, because I know that in the later books, people love this sci-fi series, and obviously I want to love it as well. I do own the first book on audio. I think I got a free one through Audible at one point through the Canada website, and I don't know why I didn't read it immediately. So again, even if it's my virtual or digital accounts, I do want to make sure I'm reading the books that I own, even if it's in a digital form. So about time I got to this one. I hope I love it. I hope I love the whole series. Let me know your opinions down below. And finally, let's talk about fantasy. I just have a few books earmarked here. Again, when it comes to epic fantasy, I tend to read those during the winter months, but I have a few that sound interesting, and especially those that sound a bit more summery. The first one I want to check out is The Queen of the Conquered by Kaysen Callender. And this is the first book in a duology that is a piece of epic fantasy that's inspired by Caribbean culture. And again, it sounds just like it's going to be summery based off of the place that it is based upon. And I know very little else about it. I think it's supposed to be a brutal book, a unique book, and I just feel like for a relatively new release, I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. Maybe that's a bad sign, but I want to check it out for myself because I tend to like books that are a little bit more underhyped, and hopefully this one works out for me as I plan to read the second one if it does. Next, I want to read The Wolf of Oren Yarrow, and this is a epic fantasy book that follows a woman who has just become the ruler of her country. However, she is hated by the people that she rules against. And as someone who loves morally gray or complex, especially female characters, I'm really curious for this one. I think it's going to be really interesting if we're following someone who at least the people do not like, and possibly we as a reader will not like. That usually doesn't stop me from enjoying a book if it's well done. So hopefully this one will work for me. I've had it on my TBR for a while, and again, it's just one that I gotta check it out soon. If not now, when will I do it? And finally, for fantasy, I want to read The Magicians by Lev Grossman. This is the first book in the trilogy, and if I like it, I want to read the rest. In the story at the beginning, we follow a man who finds out that magic is real. He goes off to this magic college and begins to learn magic. He grows friends, and the story spirals from there. This book is compared to Harry Potter or Narnia for adults, and I have actually read this book, but it was many years ago when I first started my BookTube channel, and I remember picking up this book being told that it was going to be the next Harry Potter. And if you've read this book, you know what I mean to say that it's not. It's very dark and grim in a different way, and I didn't really understand what the author was trying to do with it. Now I understand from reading other reviews and hearing other reviews that this book is not really supposed to be a love letter to magic schools. Instead, it kind of subverts the tropes and tries to do something different. And so I've always wanted to go back to this book and go back to the rest of the series, because it was a series, I think I didn't like it because the characters were unlikable and it didn't meet my expectations. Now that my expectations have been shifted from hearing and understanding what this book is supposed to be about, I'm really excited because, again, normally unlikable characters do not turn me off, and normally that's something I get really excited about. And I have a feeling now that I've read a lot more magic school books that I'm really going to enjoy something that flips the tropes on their heads and gives us a different story that's not quite what we expect it to be. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know, of the books I talked about, which ones do you think I should prioritize reading? Are there any that you're you're gonna read yourself. And I would love to hear what's on your own summer TBR, because are you like me? Do you start planning it months ahead of time? I'll be honest, I pretty much knew what was on this list for several months, and I'm just holding off trying to film it reasonably close to summer just in case I had to make any last minute changes. Anyway, if you're new to my channel, I hope you consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, and fantasy. And if you want to help me out with this video here, you can give me a thumbs up, share it around online, drop a comment, even if it's just emoji like a summer sun or the beach. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.